Good morning, folks. Back again, talking about consciousness today. I've got my good friend Diesel Isaiah Perez is on, so we're going to go ahead and let's see if we can make a nice screen. There we go. Is that better? All right.
Yeah.
Cool, cool, cool. How's it going, man, on your side of the world?
All right. My side of the world is 12:30 at night, so
Yeah,
getting ready to do this and then hit the sack. Got to start my
yeah,
day tomorrow.
yeah. That's really crazy because I we're just waking up over here.
I know
So
it's always the case. I call my dad. He's going into work, and I'm going home, and yeah, I'm going to bed. He's waking up, so it's always like that.
man, that's crazy. Well, let me not hold you up too long. I want to get to the conversation that we have been planning for a few days now. So excited to get it underway. We're talking about consciousness and the mind body problem, the different models of consciousness, how it relates to Christianity, atheism, the cult of atheism, different things. So myself, I lean towards a more pantheistic sort of view. So some people may call me an atheist, some people call me a theist disguising as an atheist. I don't really care. Whatever people want to label me as, it's like whatever suits you, that's fine. Um, but the question is cool, and I think it doesn't really. Like I think we were discussing this earlier, that however we arrive at an explanation for how consciousness may arise or why it's even possible in our reality, um, either it doesn't really affect theism as bad as maybe some people think it does. I guess. I guess then again, it kind of depends on your version of theism or how you approach the idea of God and His nature. Um, as a pantheist, I tend to look at everything as holistically. So if I was to use the language of God, I would say that God is everything. Otherwise, for me, I just couldn't see, I wouldn't see God as a concept working if He wasn't everything. Like, God is supposed to be omnipresent, all powerful. So obviously, these definitions kind of point to a more monotheistic sort of thing, or a more of a, monism, you might say. Whereas a lot of theists, I know in Islam it's more dualistic, and so we have ideas of the mind and body as a dual sort of property. Whereas I'm kind of coming at it from a monist sort of property, in my opinion. I only have an opinion. But anyways, what are your thoughts so far?
Well, so I think if you were to wind the clock back like 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, and you would try to take a look at the way people were trying to solve this problem, or trying to solve metaphysics or physics in general, science, when they're still uncovering a lot of things. They might have been doing some experiments, science experiments, and they might have come to some conclusions that they thought were right, but they just didn't have knowledge of other principles that were at play. So I don't know. I think if we were to jump into a time machine 500 years from now, probably this conversation would be like two kindergartners talking about, politics or something. Maybe it just wouldn't even register into their minds. So
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe the more we continue to learn, I think, probably change the way that we look at this. But as far as right now, we should just try to have some, humility as we discuss it.
Absolutely. That's the key right there. Humility, because if you know everything going in, then why even ask the question? Why even have a conversation if
Right.
if we have all the answers to begin with, right?
Hmm.
So for me, what I try to do in humility is kind of look at all the different models that are out there, like the models that I'm sort of familiar with, and I've kind of brushed up on it lately because I was in a debate recently, and so I was able to dig back in and jump back in on exploring the models of consciousness and figuring out which one seems to be more makes more sense to me. So you've got like this global workspace theory. It's about how the brain sort of interacts with each other. Then you've got IIT, which is integrated information theory, which is to say that consciousness is at a fundamental level in nature as it pertains to information states. And so you can measure consciousness in information states with something they call pi or
I
phi.
have heard that. Right.
Yeah, so like the more, like say a thermometer would have like a level one sort of consciousness, so to speak, because it's interacting with the world and taking in information, and it's sort of just a little tiny feedback loop. Whereas the more complex you get, the more information that's introduced, the higher that grade goes up. So consciousness on that level, it seems to be like a panpsychist sort of view that in the, embedded in nature, namely information. um, and we can talk about what information really means in that context. um, kind of tells you where consciousness is on that level. And then of course you've got, just basic emergentism, which is just to say that consciousness emerges from simpler matter, and I guess the matter and energy, and the glue that kind of sticks it all together to make something conscious would be just meeting that threshold, that right threshold, that magical sweet spot where, you get enough components together, boom, out jumps consciousness, kind of like a genie out of a bottle,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
So that one obviously has some questions to it from people. On the other hand, it seems to have some sort of precedence because emergentism is seen in nature all over the place. Like, say, the wetness of water is an emergent property from H2O and different compounds. And, there's no wetness in any of that stuff all the way down. The wetness appears once those things come together and along with the human mind to experience, the wetness itself. So it's emergent from a lot of different contexts. So that seems to make sense to me, although at on face value it seems to be kind of unintuitive because it's like, how does consciousness just magically appear out of nothing? Well, it's not really out of nothing. I think that there's laws of nature that are embedded in the structures of the universe, all the way down. And then so when evolution happens and these laws take place, more evolution, more emergence happens, and you get all kinds of stuff to come right out of it. It's kind of like, have you ever seen those Russian dolls where you have like these little dolls within a
Nesting
doll within
dolls.
a doll? Yeah, nesting
Nesting
dolls.
dolls.
So it's kind of like that. I think we're like systems within systems within systems.
Got one
There
right
you
here.
go. There you go. That's what I was referring to.
Actually, just a little side note.
Mm-hmm.
This last year there was I was actually hosting a lot of people from Russia who were escaping the war.
Yeah.
So that actually, I probably this last year alone, I probably hosted like 12 people from Russia. So REG was helping out a few of the people who were trying to get away from the war.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly younger age guys.
Wow. Wow.
Right.
That's awesome on your part, and it's just kind of a shame that, and this kind of sort of relates to consciousness in a way. I feel like the more unconscious we are, the more people kind of resort into their instincts and base animal instincts, and they don't really,
Yeah.
they get into wars, and I think a lot of wars and a lot of atrocities and things like that are a result of our unconsciousness. What do you think?
Well, this is I think part of the problem that I think with Christianity, or just trying to take like a straight up free will approach,
Hmm.
is that it's undeniable that interesting you mentioned like a nesting doll. I would call it something like a domino effect where basically the result of a thousand other dominoes getting pushed on
Mm,
down the line, and then we react to something but the pre-programming that happens, as you know, you were talking about through society or just stuff that's going on that we have absolutely no control over. It's hard to imagine where like how much of what we are doing is actually conscious. Like I know we're physically conscious, but like we're deliberately making the choices to do the things that we want to do, like
Mm-hmm.
I think that can be, as a Christian, it I think it's problematic, honestly, because in some way or another we're being influenced by, and I would just say the sense of other people. uh you could call it dysfunction or whatever, but somehow or another we're being influenced by stuff that, like, I don't. I could just give you an example from my own personal life, like growing up Latino, and there's a lot of machismo that goes
Mm-hmm.
on inside of our society, and there's like this idea that like it's really bad for men to cry,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really like not masculine to seek professional help. And
Mm-hmm.
so later on in my life, I had to jettison, get rid of all that garbage, and seek professional help. Kind of admit that I had problems that I couldn't really address on my own.
Right.
And but I think for me personally, that took me. I had to move outside of America and try to, get around other people and understand a lot of stuff I was doing was really dysfunctional and
Mm.
unhealthy.
So you're kind of saying that your consciousness is a result also of the meanings we attach to things, kind of like symbols, and we get that from society. Like crying equals weakness, or um, being macho equals being a man, or something like that. Is that kind of what you're saying there?
Well, look. So I think one thing we've got to be really clear on this is that whenever we say conscious, it could actually be used in several different ways.
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
one, you could obviously hit someone in the head and knock them unconscious, right? But
Mm-hmm.
that person is still a conscious being. Like when you're sleeping,
Mm-hmm.
you wouldn't say like you lose like your personhood or your consciousness. You might temporarily like not be awake at the time, but that, like, what we tend to think of a consciousness can also be misconstrued with the kind of the way that I was using it, which is to be deliberate and intentional
Mm.
about the things that you're doing. So I think it's just when we have this conversation, it's imperative that we understand that these terms kind of get used interchangeably, and
Right.
they are definitely related. Like I think there's definitely a relationship, but they can be used differently.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was listening to a panel discussion on consciousness, I think yesterday, and I think someone from I think she was on the IIT side, the information integration part, people, their side, and she was saying that, well, there's these things called illusions, and magicians do them all the time. There's little sometimes there's um, illusions you can sort of fabricate for people, where you can be looking at a film and you don't notice, like, I think she was showing one where an apple was actually in the screen, and then the apple would disappear at different times and no one noticed it. And so she
Oh
was
yeah.
saying that the thing that's going on is that actually they experience the apple somewhere in the brain. There's somehow the apple gets registered, but then you're not really aware of the apple consciously.
Hmm.
So how does that? So when we're talking about consciousness, what does that mean? Like like? So I guess what they were saying was that in the brain there are different systems, each of which are conscious in their own right,
Right.
and it's kind of like almost sort of like the dissociation ID,
Right.
dissociation identification disorder. People,
Right.
they used to call them split personality, um, where people will an alter will take over, and one alter would be blind, like maybe you were born blind, right? And
Mhm.
then when you have this disorder, another personality takes over at some point in time for a while. Well, that person can actually see, and they can actually look in the brain and show that that person is actually registering sight, and they're describing what they're seeing accurately and stuff like that. How is that possible if not that there's different conscious streams going on within one person, you know?
That okay. So a couple of things. That may seem like some hocus pocus stuff right there.
Mhm.
And if you ever look at um, one of my favorite movies of all time, which is Fight Club, um, that is a, it's a it's a dramatized version of that
Mhm.
concept where having two different sides of yourself, and then at the end, having one of those sides needing to overcome the other. And if you're just looking at it and you're taking everything at face value, spoiler alert, the guy shoots himself in the face and then he doesn't die, and you're thinking, oh, how's this going on? Well, you're not really catching the analogy of what's going on, because I gotta say this flat out, dude. Like, I actually had not the same exact not the same exact scenario as that, but when I did eventually seek help and go through counseling, I
Mhm.
became aware of this alter ego that was inside of me, and I
Mm.
was actually able to have an entire conversation where both the sides of my conscience were like basically have a debate. They were like debating, and I was observing as like a third party. I gotta tell you, it is the craziest fucking experience of my life, dude, by far.
Wow.
But it was pretty intense, and when I started to seek counseling, she was warning me about what some of the potential some of the potential problems that might arise with getting down to the roots of trauma,
Mhm.
and understanding kind of like some of the underlying subconscious stuff that was going on.
Mhm.
And I wasn't really listening to her because I'd wanted to get better so much, and I just kept getting in there, to eventually to the point where they just like basically just split and like had a violent interaction. And yeah, it was crazy, man. It was
Wow.
crazy.
That's very interesting. And it sort of reminds me of I don't know if you know this, there's this neuroscientist named Ramachandran, and he did this famous brain split brain operation on someone. Now, funny enough, the person was an atheist. When they
Hmm.
split his brain, and they only, and they, I think the left side of his brain was, not functioning. He was, he was a theist, but when it went to the right side of his brain, he was an atheist. So it's like, depending on what side of the brain he was, his whole entire view of the world changed depending on what side of the brain he was actually using mainly,
Really?
because of that. Yeah, so it sort of showed that the brain holds, like within one brain you can hold so many different views and personalities and characteristics, and it just depends on the one that's taking the executive control at any particular time. That's kind of like how people talk about, oh, I was not being myself today,
Right, right.
or something. That wasn't me that was talking when I was drunk last night or whatever.
Yeah,
It could have been just another alter within yourself,
right.
because your main person that you're familiar with sort of went to sleep for a while. And
Yeah, and I think
yeah.
everybody has the experience of like when you get around a certain person or certain types of people, you either will get either you might be uncomfortable, so you might get a lot more reserved,
Mm,
or there's kind of people who could bring out maybe a side of you that like people aren't used to seeing. Because I've seen people in different contexts, and I've thought like, wow, that's a completely different person. And then I've also been under different circumstances where someone would describe me as being outgoing, and then under another circumstance, someone else might describe me as an introvert because that's how I
Mm,
might get whenever I don't feel like I could freely express myself, you know. I might start to
right.
shut down. And then in other times I might be like the life of the party, you know. And especially here's the other thing too is that people gauge, you know, people tend to like gauge other people off themselves. So to certain people I might be I'll just give this as an analogy, but this is a bad analogy, but like in South Korea, most people here have like either zero or one sibling
Hmm.
because like the average like family size is like 0.989. It's like not even a whole person. So either people here have either one sibling or zero.
Mm,
And so when I tell people I have four or three siblings, they're like, "Oh, you have such a big family." But then I've been to Cambodia and I've told people that I have three siblings, so they're like, "Oh, you have such a small family," you know. So
hmm.
you're gauging off of what you're used to, what you're accustomed to. So I do want to say one thing. I did hear a good quote recently, and they said that you may not have caught that, but your brain did.
Hmm.
Y-
Yeah.
y-
Yeah.
can you tell me what
Exactly.
that means to you?
Yeah. So the self um, is not necessarily all the unconscious, or actually, what we are, what the self is, for me, in my view, emerges from all the conscious and unconscious information that's being processed within your brain, right?
Hmm.
So sometimes you aren't aware, just like you're not, like the lady was saying, you're not you're seeing the apple, you're experiencing an apple because it's obviously coming through your eyes and processed through your brain. But sometimes you aren't aware of it, but your brain is. So it's almost like your brain takes in all this information. If we had to actually process consciously all the information we take in, man, our brains would
Uh,
probably overload. We'd probably blow a fuse or something, you
right.
know? And maybe that's what that kind of
Aneurysm.
alludes to. Yeah. Yeah.
Aneurysm.
Yeah, have some kind of
I,
aneurysm, right?
actually, I do want to share with something from you real quick from my own personal life because I think it's fine to have these ideas, these conversations in an abstract way, but then we also have to remember there's the human side of what's going on.
Mhm.
Because about 10 years ago, I got divorced from my wife, who I later remarried after I found Christ. And I went to the Netherlands. And just funny story, like I wind up eating this brownie
Mhm.
there, and like 2 hours later, I wind up kicking in and causing this crazy ass reaction. But I started having all of these thoughts that it was just like a domino effect, man. Like all a floodgate of all this repressed memory came back to me, and like it's like there are all these little different pieces, puzzles, and they kind of just fit in perfectly. And the next day, I called up my mom's best friend, someone who I knew she told everything to, and I told her, I said, "Hey, you know, I'm wondering if you could fill me in on some stuff because I kind of just had some of these revelations and I don't really know like you know if they're accurate or not." And I started asking her these questions, and she basically affirmed everything that
Mm.
that I remembered from my childhood. And after that conversation, I'm like, I feel like the biggest idiot in the world now because some of this stuff was just so obvious that it amazed me that my subconscious would have kept all of this stuff from me. And
Mm.
that like I don't know, I think it was like a defense mechanism, honestly. But all that
Mm.
being said, I think you know it's very it's not at all wrong to seek help, you know, if you need it. And I'm a strong advocate for people, you know, seeing people, professionals,
Absolutely. You know,
because
our
it
mind is
depends.
our most important tool that we
Uh-huh.
have. You know, without your mind, nothing else is going to work out here for you. So I don't never understand why there's such a shame attached to, not seeking help, not evaluating your issues. And actually, people, when they have certain mental issues, they try to normalize it.
Hmm.
People try to say, "Oh, there's nothing
Justify.
wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with my mental issue. You're trying to use a pejorative label against my condition as if it was bad." And so people have these sort of things, and that may or may not be true. I'm not a professional on any level. There's certain things like, we talked about like the trans issue. We've talked about things like, you know, uh, dysphoria, gender dysphoria, things like that.
Right.
These could be mental issues that people are dealing with. And so people are saying, well, when people have these sort of operations, or they're they're really just trying to normalize their insanity. And I don't know if you really think about that, like say, um, if people actually feel this way, whether the operation is a way of helping them. And it's not even, I think the other thing too is I think when people address something like gender dysphoria or being trans, there should be a lot of um, therapy before it gets to
Hmm.
that point. Like there should be a lot of a professional to actually look and see, is this the best alternative for that person? Because it could be they'll regret later on down the line when they finally do get it all sorted out. Then maybe they would um, regret that they had that operation, and then it's not reversible at that time, or if it is, it's still a big problem. And so I think that there is a place for therapy, and there is a place for examining these things. But I think what happens in today's society is there's two extremes to it. And all of it kind of takes therapy out of the picture. All
Hmm.
of it's to say, no, they have every right. You should give, hormone therapy to these 8-year olds or whatever if they feel like they're a woman and they're really a male. Um, just, pump them full of hormones, whatever. Forget the therapy. That's just a way of trying to make people feel sad or whatever. Then other people have the alternative view, where they'll say, yeah, it's just, you know, it's just something they should snap out of. They should just realize, look, you're a biological male. That's just the truth. If you feel like you're a female, you're just scientifically inaccurate and wrong. So just logic your way out of it. And I don't know if that's realistic or not. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm, because I don't know much about the topic to be in that depth. So it's tricky.
Yeah, yeah. I do want to chime on this for a second because I think wherever you fall on that issue that you're just talking about right now, I think we need to be very sensitive and compassionate when we're discussing this
Yep.
because this is something that affects people's lives. And I think from someone who has gone through this dysphoria, body dysmorphia, and gender dysphoria personally, it's not something that's comfortable to go through. And I know this for certain. Like most trans people, they wouldn't, if you gave them the option, they wouldn't choose to be going through this. So it's like when people go through anything, it's something that's causing them. Just by the general definition of what dysphoria means, is that
Mm,
there's distress about it. So um, regardless where you fall in this issue, I think we got to can never get too boggled down in the scientific jargon or whatever, but understand that these are real people's lives, and
mm-hmm.
that some of this can come down to just pure biology, and some of it might be psychological.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, though, we need to find ways to accommodate everybody in society with
Yeah, I mean,
dignity and
it
respect.
could be a social thing. A lot of the critics for the trans community may say that, oh, a lot of people are saying that they're men or women when their biological sex is opposite from the way they feel. They're just doing that for attention. They're just doing
Right.
it
I don't.
because activists have brainwashed them. The liberal media has brainwashed them into thinking it's cool to say these sort of things. I don't think it's that simple. I think that's just an excuse people give so that they can be sort of hateful in some
Yeah.
ways. And and let's face it, when we don't understand certain things, we tend to demonize it because we don't understand it, and we tend to ridicule it. And it's like, I don't have those problems. It's kind of like those people that are rich putting down the poor people for being poor. It's like, I'm not poor. Look at me. If I can do it, you can. But yet they were probably born with a
Right.
silver spoon in their mouth or something like that, or got lucky. I mean, these things happen in life. I mean, so it's one of those things where social, all of that stuff sort of plays a part. But not to get off the topic. I mean, it is. I'm kind of going way off the topic, though.
Hold on. Hold on. Just one
Yep.
second. I do want to read a quote
Yep.
before we do go on, but it says the
Sure.
oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest fear is the fear of the unknown. H.P. Lovecraft. And I
Mm.
just saw that quote today, and I screenshot it. And so, yeah, I think in general, this is a good transition because this issue in particular can leave people confused, because it is confusing, if
Mhm.
you're on the outside. But I think just in general, things that we don't understand can tend to make us nervous or, scared or bare minimum like anxiety, because we don't really know the full spectrum of this conversation. Because generally speaking, I think this topic has some like really big implications behind it. I'll just give you a quick example. Like, let's say I'm Christian and my mom's Christian, and well, she was Christian before she passed away, um, but the reality is that we know this though, because this has been proven. Like, if you damage certain parts of the brain, like it might genuinely affect your personality. Because there was this case of this guy named Phineas Gage, and
Yes.
Gage, and
Mm.
he's like walking, and like basically this pressurized like pipe shoots up, and it basically impales his head,
Mm.
and he winds up he survives it, but he winds up like becoming quite a different person afterwards. And talking about what I saw with my own mother, like she was just a regular, housewife, uh, minister's wife, and she suffered an accident, and as a result of that, she had to start taking pain medication, and it turned into a full out addiction that caused unbelievable damage to my family, and
Mm.
ultimately took her life. And but I remember how judgmental I felt towards her, and there was a stage in my life I literally wanted to kill her because she was causing like so much damage to my family.
Mm.
And I remember though, well, I look back now and I understand addiction a bit more and how it could affect your people's minds, because there were times where she just was not herself. Like, if she could objectively look at herself from 10 years ago, that person could have never imagined she would have been the person who she wanted to be. I remember one time, like,
Mm.
we had to take the medication from her, and I remember she like punched me in the face, man.
Ooh.
And she really like lost her stuff sometimes. But so that being said, like, addiction can generally change like people's minds, physiology and the structure of the mind, the brain.
Yeah,
So
and that leaves a question about
uh
the soul and
hmm
free will as well,
right,
because if what you're saying is true, especially like with this Phineas Gage, sort of argument you're putting forth, it's kind of like, well, which one is the soul? Like, is the soul also affected by the damage to the brain, or is
right, right,
is the soul the brain in the things
right.
that it's doing? So it seems to me, just on the face of it, that it seems like if you're going to damage the brain and that damages your entire character, and intentions and things like that, then this kind of leaves the soul somewhere out of the picture altogether.
Right, right,
Um, it seems like if you take away the idea of the self, the behaviors, the intention, all the big story, the narrative we tell ourselves, what are we really left with when it comes to consciousness? We're just left with a raw experience. And maybe that's what the soul is.
right,
The soul is
right.
just pure experience without any thoughts, without any self stories, without any identification, because it seems like that's the only route I could take. Because if damaging the brain actually damages all of that, then we're talking about physical stuff.
Yeah, and here's the other part of this that's pretty scary to think about as well. Like, especially if you approach this from a purely like uh materialistic standpoint, if you try to think about what someone could like, let's just, you know, the world just recently went through a COVID-19 pandemic, and all this damage that got done as a result of that. But just try to imagine if someone were able to, um, there was a lot of talk about whether or not this is engineered in a lab, but just imagine a virus being unleashed on people that could genuinely turn you into like the opposite kind of person that you are. And then so from like no fault of your own, you might wind up doing some kind of crimes that you would never do under like a normal state of
Mm.
mind. So it's pretty scary if you really start to examine it, take it out to some of its logical conclusions.
I think there are some conspiracy theories where they feel like the government has done that to already to certain people. I don't know much about it, but I've heard stuff like that where they use like certain frequencies to to brainwash people and get them to act like robots and do their will for them. This stuff seems pretty possible given the Phineas Gage situation, in which also goes to free will again, um, and then how we treat people. We could all, and then the judgment. Let's say in certain versions of theism, God is judging people by their behaviors on
Right,
earth.
right, right,
Um, where is the basis for the judgment if people are really just the product of their brain states, which oftentimes
right,
change, they oftentimes
right,
evolve through lifetimes, and no
right,
one's the same. It's not like we're all built with this one homogenous brain that God gives you to say,
right,
look, everybody
right,
has an equal footing in
right,
life, and you get to decide what you want freely. Well, if that were true, then why do we all behave differently? Why do we all have such extreme
right,
behaviors?
right. Yeah,
It's really
right.
weird. It's really kind of hard. Those are the questions that just, really bother me when I think about it. When I was a theist, back when I really was like the classical theist type,
Mhm.
um, those are the kind of questions that just kept me up at night. I was like, well, that's not right. I've got my Aunt Millie who, she's going through, you know, in an old age, her brain is deteriorating and she's just acting out of her person. It's not her fault.
Right.
Where did Aunt Millie go? So I
Mhm.
mean, she's right there. It's just that she's the product of, unfortunately, she's just the product of her body and brain, deteriorating,
Mhm.
and that seems to be the most parsimonious view. But then it makes me question. Well, then why is God going to? Why does God want to kick her out of the Kingdom Hall of Jehovah Witnesses because she used a cuss word? She doesn't know
Huh.
what she's doing. I mean, yeah, well, we all have free will. You just free will your way out of it. I mean, otherwise, God wouldn't have punished Adam and Eve for their sin. So obviously, free will is true. So therefore, Aunt Millie is also just misusing her free will. She's not trying hard enough. It's like, no, she doesn't know what's going on. She's in her own reality right now. So none of that really kind of made sense to me. And those are the kind of things that I think about. You know.
Yeah, this is I know you. first of all, in order to fully have this conversation, we'd probably need some actual experts in on here, and I don't think
Hmm.
either you or I qualify as actual experts. But and second of all, even if we had experts, this is not something you could solve in like an hour podcast.
Right.
You're gonna need
Sure, we
you need
can. This is a top notch. We are experts on here. No, I'm just kidding.
even like in the God discussion, I don't try to solve that problem when I'm talking to an atheist. I try to kind of maybe put some flags in the sand and revisit certain things and try to make some progress and try to take some time to think about the other person's position. And I think it's really healthy to see things from different perspectives. Because I will say this, look, I will say this because I wasn't always a Christian, and I did spend some time looking into Buddhism and Islam, and I
Hmm.
did go into like a did a temple stay to go in and see how the monks live. And the Zen master came out and he flat out tells me, he's like, "Oh, you'd make a good monk, dude, because my hair, or lack thereof."
Hmm. Yeah.
And but he started telling me like, he told us that he did something like 10,000 vows for um like 3 months or something, like 100 days, something like that. And it's something that literally takes like you got to wake up at like 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning and go to like all the way at nighttime, right?
Hmm.
Like you got to spend the entire day doing this. And I asked him, I was like, what 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 could you possibly benefit from doing something so redundant that has like no, I couldn't see any kind of value or any kind of logic, rhyme, or reason behind it.
Hmm.
And he told me flat out, he's like, you're thinking about the situation completely wrong. He goes, because you're thinking of, you want to have the answer before you go in and do it. And he's like, when you go and you do it along the way, you get the answer.
Mm.
And so, someone who's had the discipline to do that, um, I wouldn't even begin to think, like me as a Christian, who lacks a lot of discipline, to follow some of the most basic commandments consistently. Like, I think I take a look at someone like that, takes their religion that seriously, and is willing to dedicate their basically their whole existence to it. Because that's what these Buddhist monks do.
Hmm.
They're in this like every day. They shave their head. They basically give up everything. And I
Hmm.
think the insights that in fact, I know this because I've talked to people who've done these meditations for like 3 months. And one girl in particular told me that like she didn't speak for 3 months and she had to do everything in slow motion. It's like when you eat, you have to like
Hmm.
at that speed, like literally everything. And she told me that like if when you do that for like weeks at a time, that like you could like see the flapping of like the butterfly's wing, like everything starts moving in slow motion, and your mind picks up
Mm.
on stuff that you were never aware of before.
Wow.
So I definitely know that like the kind of stuff that we tap into in our minds every day, especially, and I do have to say this too. I know this is a bit off topic, but the meditation, when you do proper meditation and you completely deprive yourself from like light and sound,
Hmm.
your mind starts going slipping into completely different place. Because I've experienced this multiple different times in my life, and
Hmm.
it takes you to a higher level of consciousness. And
Yes.
it's something like I've heard like alpha and like theta waves, that
Yep.
like your brain is able to get to a just a completely different place. And when you get there, you're able to solve problems that like you wouldn't be able to solve otherwise. Because I've experienced it. This is not hocus pocus. I've personally
Oh
gone
yeah,
through
yeah,
this
yeah.
myself.
I understand you 100%. I've done meditation, mindfulness meditation, where I concentrate on my breath or focus on something. And
Right,
there's other practices I did that put me in what they call flow state, where
right,
things you lose track of time, like you're talking about things going slow motion, you're able to actually solve problems better
Mhm.
when you come back from that flow state, or actually solve problems within that flow state. Things tend to work better. I've also done hallucinogens like DMT, um, which really sort of took me into an entirely different realm of
Right.
reality in my mind, where
Right.
I
I've
couldn't really
experienced it.
put it in words, but the impressions that I was given sort of unlocked some understandings about the nature of my own consciousness and myself and the universe at large, profoundly. They sort of made me not fear death, all of this weird stuff, and it's almost like synesthesia. People that have, maybe they bang their head just the right way, and now they can play musical instruments like an expert when they didn't have any musical inclination at all to begin with, or they can see things in numbers. They see
Yeah.
they
Yeah. Yeah.
see
Yeah.
colors for sound or
Yeah.
things like
Right.
that.
Right. Right.
The mind is a very mysterious organ, and
Right. Right.
there's a lot of theories to say that the mind is sort of like an antenna where it's kind of tapping into information in the structures of the universe somehow, because it's part of the universe, and so it's sort of
Right.
going to project itself onto itself, um, and create this sort of information loop with unconscious information out there. So it's all sort of spiritual sounding. It does sound sort of woo woo and all of that, but there may be some sort of scientific explanation, maybe not, maybe it's still true, even though. So I'm just open to a whole lot of what nature has to offer us. And the best way is, like you say, the best way to get there is just to be humble. We can talk about these things and explore them and bounce ideas, and they're just interesting, and but I think most of all is if you behave and apply like some sort of devotional to your life, that's when the stuff really answers for you without words. Like you said, these practices that the Buddhists might go through, like one of them might be this, one Buddhist monk told me he would create like this artwork for months and months, finally get it done, and then once it's
And then
done,
destroy it.
destroy it.
Destroy
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
and it teaches you something about not being attached to things,
Right.
and you keep doing stuff like that to yourself, you get into a pattern where you don't really freak out when you lose things, and your quality of life becomes a lot more peaceful, you know.
I. You know what? I've actually have experienced that. Um, and it's come about from multiple things happening that um one was that me almost dying and being unable to stand for like several months,
Mm,
and to the point where I had to like crawl on the floor with like this, where I was like I literally had to crawl at that rate,
mm-hmm,
and my entire body had like broken down. But it was literally like the lowest point of my life, and I couldn't work. I couldn't even stand up, and my family had absolutely zero money here because of this, and having to spend time in the hospital, and it was just hellacious, man. And I couldn't see my daughter for several weeks because they didn't know what I might have, and so basically I was in the hospital basically spending just the entire day crying,
mm,
because I felt like the most worthless father in the planet, and plus I couldn't see my daughter as well, so actually made myself a lot worse because I was doing that, and they eventually said you have to leave the hospital because you're getting worse, you're like literally getting worse every day,
mm,
and they're like we'll deal with you in like an outpatient, but yeah, you're getting worse. And so but after emerging from that and after getting better, um like any problem that I've experienced in relation to that, dude, has been like nothing. So it's like I don't lose my cool the way that I used to, and
Mm-hmm.
I stay calm and collective. And any problem I experience, I'm like, wow, that I've already gone through hell and back, man. Like, so
Wow.
yeah, it's kind of amazing where arrived to the pace of peace in my mind, where I'm like, whenever after you experience something like that, like, what the hell else is gonna phase you, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
sometimes we need that purification through suffering.
yeah, yeah, that's so true. And without doing something that can get you out of a rut, so to speak, like if I see some behavior that's not really serving me, I know that I can't really just stop it on the drop of a dime and will it away. I have to start creating a pattern and over time create a new habit, you know, and that's really what I would need to do. So I kind of tend to look at free will as something that happens over time. Like if we really, there's a saying, I think it was Daniel Dennett or somebody who said it is like, if we were to shrink ourselves infinitesimally, like if we were to shrink ourselves down, then everything becomes external. Everything is going to affect you and pull your strings if you shrink yourself and make yourself small. But if you see yourself as big and you can be that bigger person, then you become a causal power. And but I'm thinking the only way to really do that is over time, because that's exactly what determinism is, right? It's like little things that we're unconscious of. Like it could just be one molecule bumping into another that causes me to feel hungry, that might cause me to, behave one way when under another circumstance I wouldn't behave that way. That's looking at it from a very microcosmal level, like a very small level. But over time, maybe we do have some sort of sentient or some sort of control over our lives.
Um, are you familiar with Ben Shapiro?
Yep.
Yeah, I believe it's Ben Shapiro, and I might have been Alex, either Rationality Rules or
Alex
the
O'Connor,
Cosmic. Yeah,
Cosmic
Alex,
Skeptic. Yeah, I saw
um,
that.
um,
Yep.
one of those two, where he was debunking ah the first guy, Ben Shapiro,
Yeah.
and Ben Shapiro was basically making like a case. I mean, he had a pretty convoluted argument, but that didn't really make sense. But
Right.
I think one of the underlying things that he was trying to say that I can appreciate is that it would seem that if you just subscribe to like hardcore like materialism,
Mm-hmm.
which Juche, I used to subscribe to that. It's an atheistic philosophy, but if that's
Mm-hmm.
what you subscribe to, it doesn't seem like you could break free from, the, basically, if consciousness, as you were talking about, is just an emergent property, then it seems like that's going to be governed by a whole host of other like things that are determined from a you know, chemical materialistic standpoint. So it doesn't seem like whatever conclusions you come to one way or the other, like it seems like you're going to come to those conclusions no matter what. Like
It'd be arbitrary.
we might have the process of like, oh yeah, yeah, I've come to this conclusion that I don't believe in God, or that I'm a Democrat or a Republican or whatever, but it seems like even if we go by your own life experiences, right? Like most people, who live in like bigger cities tend to be more liberal, where most people like in the rural areas tend to be more conservative, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not always the case, but just generally speaking, then that's being determined by, again, other things, where you're raised, your family, what time frame, like what time era that you were born in.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of stuff that's going on there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like that's why we have statistics. Like statistics wouldn't work under if there were no determinism, if there were no um, deterministic principles at play, you could never make a statistical analysis of anything. We have statics and we have predictions based on those stats. So that's why the weatherman can say, well, there's a certain percentage that we're going to have rain today because they go by patterns and information, and this causes that. There's a causal chain. And if we are to take ourselves out of the causal chain, then that's kind of like putting us into this mysterious, unexplainable place. Now, maybe we are part of that in some to some degree. Like the way that I kind of open the possibility is that I think determinism is obviously true, but it's not the whole story. In other words,
Hmm.
we emerge, yeah, there's a lot of emergent properties going on to create who we are. Um, you put alcohol to our brain and out emerges the experience of being drunk. Obviously, that's true, but that's not the whole story. Like, I think there's also top down causation going on too, where we have some sort of, we have maybe, it's kind of like a horse with blinders on, you know, he can kind of see what's directly in front of him, has control for what's directly in front of him, but maybe not the entire context. And so maybe that's what's going on. We have like this small slither of this thing we call free will going on. Um, there's a lot of arguments for and against that, though, I admit.
But this is one of the things that Alex O'Connor was trying to debunk about what he was saying, because he was
Hmm.
saying it seems as though that the only way you really could have free will, and Alex, someone like Alex O'Connor says, okay, well then we just don't have free will. That's his solution. But it seems like one of the only ways that we could have that is that if we had some kind of transcendent spirit, um, that was basically able to rise above just the obvious chemical reactions that are going on inside of all of our bodies, from
Hmm.
sickness to the atoms, just everything that's going on, that stuff that we have absolutely no control over, you know. But then again, that raises, because I've just personally seen it. Like, I've personally seen a good, loving mother and you know, mother and wife turn into someone who's not recognizable due to addiction,
Hmm.
and that was, I would say, it was completely out of her control. Like, I don't think there's any universe in the world where my mom could have 10 years before that said, oh yeah, I really want to go down this route. It was something that, like, you know she had this really bad pain in her back that she just couldn't function otherwise from having these pain medications. And then it just turns into, well, it's going on right now a lot in the US. There's a
Hmm.
lot of people,
Yes.
speaking of, we touched on like emotional and stuff in the brain trauma, but a lot of people have use drugs as an escape for reality,
Yeah.
and I didn't really understand this at the time, and I really did wish I did, because it would have changed the way that I thought about the situation at the time. But to understand that there was also just a desire to escape reality that
Hmm.
was equally as potent. The physical pain was The emotional pain was equally as valid and hurtful as the physical pain that she was experiencing. And it's just unfortunate, especially right now, it's fentanyl. There's a lot of
Yeah.
people who are suffering with that, and I've never used it. My cousin has told me that it's like it is a 6 hour escape from reality. So I could
Mm.
understand how that could be addictive.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. A couple guys passed away at this bar I go to um,
Really.
not long ago. Yeah, they came in. They overdosed on fentanyl, and two of the guys, he died right at the bar. The other guy, he
Oh
collapsed
my
out
God.
in the other guy, he collapsed in the parking lot, and then the ambulance came and tried to put, Narcan in their nose, and but it didn't work. But Yeah, it's a very addictive substance. It's very dangerous. It's a street drug down here in Florida that's really prevalent. And in fact, the city that I live in is the number one city in Florida for fentanyl deaths. So it's
Damn.
definitely something you don't want to mess around with. Even buying weed off the street, you don't want to mess with it because they lace it with fentanyl, and it's just crazy. People are dying right and left. And but it goes to tell you how, which is really weird because I live in a very conservative town in a very conservative state, and yet the drug addiction and death related is so high. Now, one of the arguments that the governors made and all the politicians made is that under conservatism, people will have more opportunities and better quality of life. They'll be taught better morals and principles and Bible stuff in school. Like they're trying to put prayer in school, and people are. It's a Bible belt. Let's put it that way. But the drug
I'm
addiction,
very against that, by the way. Just for the record, I'm very against
yeah,
prayer in school.
yep. And it just goes to show you that emotional issues, you can't just will it away. You can't just come up with laws and come up with policies and books and things that you can suggest. It's a lot deeper than that, I think. And I think, it's just a reflection of the world we live in. We're losing, and this is where the spirituality, I think, is waning in the world, where people are so materialistic, whether you're religious or not. People tend to look at the environment, let's say everything from the earth, the environment of the earth, they tend to look at it as a resource rather than something we should be in harmony with, you know? And so we try to control the uncontrollable through technology and through everything else. But what does it do for us? It gets us right into being addicted to social media. It gets us into climate change and things that are destroying the world, because we've lost this view of the world as something we should be integrated into rather than now we look at it as something, as a resource, something we can use and abuse. And this goes for both the religious and the unreligious. The very scientific people, they just want to keep on thinking technology is the solution when it's actually causing a lot of the problems.
Hmm.
um, and then the religious people will say, well, the earth was put here for us to dominate and use as a resource. So they are against things like the idea of global warming and a lot of the things we deal with. So I think I lean towards more of a naturalistic sort of view. Like I kind of look at the nature as sacred in a way, you know, even though nature in its own right is trying to kill us with cancer and the sun is
COVID.
trying to skin cancer, COVID, the nature is against us, but there's some kind of balance we should strike. But not only that, I mean, for thousands of years, for I'd say 98% of human history, of religious history, people tended to be more animistic. They sort of looked at nature as God in a way. And so they respected it. And they also expected death. They were at peace with the idea of dying and things like that. But there was more of a harmony so that the quality of your lifespan could be pretty good. But now that we're looking at the world as a resource, something we can use and abuse, even that quality of life sucks. That's why there's so much drug abuse, like you're saying, and depression and wars, and all of these things are on account of that. I think we've just lost track of our spiritual base, I think.
Well, I think you could blame the cult of atheism for that.
Yeah, you can
No,
definitely, because
no,
seriously though, because a lot of
no.
atheists, well, I would say scientism, like there's a lot of atheists that tend to look at science as the god or the answer. And I can say this as an atheist, that a lot of people look at it that way. And so
No,
you might have a point there.
no. That was a joke. That was a
Yeah.
joke. But because because the thing is, you mentioned something about Christianity or just saying like thinking or praying away the problems. I think you were saying it in terms of the transgender issue.
Oh yeah.
Um, but there's a lot of other stuff that Christians, not just, I don't want to pick on Christians, but I think you could call it like
Mhm.
superstitious ways of thinking that can be really harmful to in people's lives. And I don't think religion is really helps people in that sense. I could tell you one extreme bit here in South Korea that I see all the time. It's not just in South Korea. It's also in like Japan and China as well. Just call it like East Asia. Is that there's like a lot of emphasis on zodiacs, and like they actually take it a step further. They talk about like people's blood types, and so they look for compatibility with blood types, and then they not only like, we take into consideration the year, or no, sorry, the month that you're born in, right, with the various zodiacs, but they also take into consideration the year. So they go in like 12 year cycles. So you have like that cycle, and then you also have like the month as well.
Mhm.
So but people genuinely turn to these things in their life as far as like, getting a job or getting married. Like I genuinely had this experience where this girl I was dating, and her mom was really upset that I was American, and so she didn't want us to date because of that. And then finally, like, okay, well maybe I can accept this. Okay, so she actually asked her to give me her birth to give her my birthday, and then she took it to one of these like fortune teller people, and there's
Mhm.
like, oh, these guys aren't compatible. They're not compatible. But a lot of people will base their like literally they're all over the place because in America, like people might watch their horoscopes for like fun, and
Mhm.
like it's kind of just like a kind of a trendy thing to do, like, oh, what are you, Capricorn, whatever,
Mhm.
you're incompatible with this. Like they literally like base part of their lives, you know, around it. They'll
Yeah.
make big decisions based on this, and so a lot of the superstitious I've seen, because I've tried to objectively like evaluate the kind of stuff that I've seen, because people, they get really upset about stuff that like Harry Potter, and this is like a fictional story. This doesn't have any kind of
Mhm.
like, you had mentioned magicians, and like my parents were completely convinced growing up. They used to tell me all the time that like these magicians like sold their soul to the devils, and they were like doing all these magics by like the devil, right?
Mhm.
And then lo and behold, later on, all these channels come out on YouTube where they're just showing how they do these things with,
Mm. Right.
literally smoke and mirrors and angles and angles of the cameras and stuff, and they're showing how you can do all this stuff. And there's
Mhm.
nothing like remotely superstitious or magical about it.
It's just
It
they
literally comes
understand.
down to science.
Yeah, exactly.
But
It comes down to how the brain works, and they can manipulate that
right,
stuff, and I think that's what goes on in all sorts of areas of life, not just in things we see, things we hear, things we process in our minds. Our minds are very limited. We didn't evolve really to know the truth on things necessarily. We know what works for us at any given point in time.
right,
So we have type one and type two errors. Like you hear rustling in the bush in the savannah. If you're more scientific minded, you'll go and try to figure out what is it before I run away. I want to know the truth. You might get eaten up by a lion. Whereas
right.
if you're kind of superstitious and you feel like, oh, there's some sort of beast in the bush, or it could be a ghost or something, you're going to run away, but you're going to live to tell the tale, even though you might not have, told the truth. Maybe
Right.
there was nothing but wind there, but at least
Mhm.
you survived to tell the tale to your offspring that you're going to have. And then that gets carried on over and over and over through generations of people. So now we're a group of human beings that like do type 1 and type 2 errors all the time. and it's part of who we are. It's part of our humanity, and it's part of what helped us survive. It's part of what makes us happy, joyful, but it doesn't necessarily tell us the truth. We just sort of conflate those two things, I think, because the mind is a very mysterious organ, man. It Our experience doesn't necessarily have to match up with what reality is, whatever reality is. Um, I've been watching. I used to watch a lot of Donald Hoffman, who has this idea of simulation theory, and he doesn't know whether it's an artificial sort of simulation or just like a natural simulation. But either way, our brain is just seeing the simulation of reality, and it makes a lot of sense when you break it down.
Well, a couple of things is that, first of all, I don't think anyone's going to be able to answer. Like, I generally, I can't even imagine what kind of. Let's just assume for a second that this is a simulation. Let's just assume that it's a simulation on a computer screen, right?
Hmm.
I don't even know how we could ever truly verify that one way or the other, because anything that we would appeal to is going to be some kind of like, it's going to be a part of that matrix. So
Here's
we're
what you
kind
can
of like
do.
stuck.
I got an
I'm sorry.
idea. I have
Yeah,
an
go ahead.
idea. Not to break you off, but I just had an idea. What you could do. You could do statistics. So I think right now the chances are 50-50. So we don't know either way. It could go either
Right.
50-50, right? I'm with you on that right now. There's no way we can figure it out. But suppose we start simulating worlds. Suppose
Hmm.
we start simulating conscious things that we can verify. If we ever get to that point, and I don't know, this might be 1,000 years from now or whatever, we're able to simulate an entire universe on a computer. And the beings within the computer are, for all intents and purposes, um, determined conscious beings, within our program, right? Well, in that case, we could say, well, we've done it in the universe, and we've only been a civilization for what 1,000 years doing this stuff, but the universe is like 8 billion years old, right? So there has to be other creatures besides ourselves that have done it, or maybe we did it and we're actually in the simulation that we
Hmm.
created, and we're inside that little nesting doll, creating
Right.
simulations upon simulations ad infinitum. So that's one way you could kind of at least increase the odds. So if we're able to create these simulations, then that would increase the odds that we're actually living in a simulation ourselves.
Any chance you've ever seen the movie at the 13th floor?
Yeah, long time ago.
Yeah, because that's exactly the same kind of concept that's going on there, where it's like you have several simulated realities that are taking place inside of each
Mm-hmm.
other, and so it's a jumbled little mess that winds up going on. Anyway, all I'm trying to say is that I don't like I don't I generally don't think that we could solve this issue for like 100% certain, like one
Mm-hmm.
plus one equals two. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that we're going to be able to do that. We might get knowledge from another being that might, if there is another being who created it, he, she, agree, they, them, whatever, they might share it with us, that knowledge. But I think in the, in the, I think let's like not lose sight of the fact in this conversation that like we are experiencing something right now. And
Mm-hmm.
because I think this, if you start to think too abstractly, you can start to lose, you can start to lose
Mm-hmm.
focus on some of the realities that's going on right now, because there's a lot of people that are suffering. I mean, I've seen a lot of this firsthand, like seeing poverty on a TV screen or reading about it is something different, but like being up close and physical with it, which is what I've seen in the third world. I've even been in North Korea a few times, and yeah, it's quite different because there's I think when you start to think too abstractly, we start to lose sight on the fact that like there's
Very good
there's stuff
point.
that we could
Very
be
good.
doing right now. We could be doing
Yeah,
right now. Like
you're right. And see that's another point, and I had thought about that one day in relation to God beliefs, because I started realizing actually the simulation argument is very similar to the God argument. That there's this programmer, i.e., God, that created his little playground, his little simulated playground with all his people and everything.
playground too. A
Yeah,
playground.
like if you look at the world as a simulation, then the suffering in the world can easily get ignored because it's like who cares? It's just simulated. It's going to end and then you're out of it and then who cared because it's over now. And we're on to the next level. But then you could take that same abstraction, that same sort of analogy to the God idea. You could come up with this theological story that says God created everything, but guess what? This world that you live in is just a blink of an eye compared to the eternity that you're going to get to live with God in this other world, this other reality. So those two analogies are kind of saying the same thing.
Hmm.
And so, but the danger, like you just pointed out, when you get too carried away with those type of abstractions, it's easy to lose sight of the suffering that happens in the world for real, in this reality, the one that we know exists, you
Well,
know.
there's this expression that my spiritual mentor in America taught me, and he was like a very practical guy, and he told me something that really stick with me. Probably told me like 10 years ago, but he said, he's like Isaiah. There's a lot of Christians that are so heavenly minded that they're of no earthly use. And so that's something that like
Mm,
really stuck with me that I don't want to win a debate with people, and I don't want to humiliate people in a discussion. um I don't want to bruise people's egos even if I can win the debate, you know. And I'm not really someone who sets out to win debates with people, but even if I could, like, um I don't want to bruise someone's ego just for the sake of like making myself feel better. Because at the end of the day, it's like the kind of energy that I would have to exert to be able to do the research and the you know, to really get to the point where I know I'm going to win this debate. Like there's
mm-hmm.
so much other stuff I could be doing, and
Yeah, the
that's
payoff.
personally where I try to focus my time and energy on is doing things. You know, as I was talking about last year with the um, with the Russians, or you know, I was helping survivors of the Itaewon crowd crush that happened here in South Korea. I'm not trying to toot my own horn here because Lord knows I have thousand and one other issues that I got going on in my personal life that are uh, stuff that you would not expect a 10-year Christian to be going through. So I'm not trying to sound like kind of this ultra Christian, but like there's a lot of stuff I could be doing with my time, money, and I would rather be focusing on that than like trying to humiliate people or own somebody in a
Yeah.
conversation, in a debate. Actually, I was just thinking this because I do got to go right now, but I was just thinking, how would you rate this conversation in relation to your other talk you had with that guy you were telling me about?
Oh man, this is a hundred, a hundred being the best that the best it could be, zero being the worst. That one was trash, so I would put it in the just about a zero bin, because of just the vitriol of
Mm-hmm.
just over an opinion. And a lot of people in that group have come out and expressed that they identify as God's spiritual warriors. And so the reason why they debate and they put people down and they fight atheists and destroy them is so that they can do God's work on earth, which is to convert people to Christianity. And I just think that that's not working because all you're
Mm-hmm.
doing is you're having a pissing contest and you're just
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
making the atheists want to beat you more. You're not
Right.
actually bringing them into any humble um, mind frame. You're actually trying to force their mind frame to be competitive against you. And so I don't see what they're really trying to, you know, get at. I don't
Pi-
know.
that's interesting. You say pissing contest because basically pissing contest, whoever could piss the furthest would probably be the person with the longer Johnson. So that
Hmm.
basically comes down to a Johnson test. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
If you
absolutely.
catch
And
my drift.
it's very important to figure that stuff out. But yeah, man, I appreciate the conversation. I know you've got to go. Um, and one thing I will say, I was just thinking about before I let you go is that maybe even if God or the simulation is true, I don't know if you're familiar with what most NDEers say, that people have these near death experiences, but they say that although this is God's simulation, we're still supposed to care for the poor, the elderly, the sick, anyways, because it's all, even though it's all part of the simulation, it's all part of the test. So it's for soul growing and things like that. So, regardless, if you look at it from a heavenly God, spiritual Christian point of view, or a more simulation like an artificial computer type thing, both things you can make that same argument that even though you don't have to be so nihilistic in those views. That's just something I was just thinking. I was remembering about those indie years.
Well, I do want to close out on something is that I I'm not someone who likes to go and argue other people's religions. I as a Christian I've learned a lot from Hindus and Buddhists and Muslims and Jews and atheists too. I mean, I talk. I'm not sure if I've told you this story, but about 2 years ago, I went to the UK and got to meet one of my atheist co-hosts and saw firsthand that like this guy was a better father and a better husband and a better provider than me. And this epiphany that I had there, where I'm like, I try to take this like, well, I'm not sure. I really don't. I really try not to, but like, I think we naturally want to compare ourselves to other people and to think of ourselves better with people from other views that we disagree with, And at the end of the day, I was like, I had to come to the conclusion. I'm like, well, what is it? What does it really matter if I have a better belief of this guy? If in the real world he's being a better person than me. Like at the end of the day, I don't care if I'm like the smartest person in the universe. If I'm not being attentive and caring and loving and providing for my daughter the best way that I could be, like I don't give a fuck about all that other stuff because
Hmm.
all that other stuff is secondary to the thing that I find to be the most important, which is my daughter, on this planet.
Yeah.
So there's that. I think we can learn from each other. Um, one, not to pick on Buddhism, but Buddhism. Though I've seen and I've met Buddhists and I know Buddhists, and actually my boss is a Buddhist, but um, I do find I do find a lot of this stuff impractical because they might spend like a year or months or a decade like meditating and trying to fully understand what compassion or love is, and yet they'll isolate themselves and they'll put themselves in positions where they actually need to be reliant on other people to
Hmm.
receive sustenance, um,
Hmm.
and they don't really contribute anything to like the society other than you know whatever they got going on, their spiritual advice and there's some merit to that. I'm not going to say that they don't contribute anything, but at the end of the day, it's like, well, what exactly is it that they're, how exactly are they extending this love if they don't have a wife, a kids, if they've
Hmm.
removed themselves from society and they've just isolated themselves in the woods? Like to me, they're missing something. They're missing something vitally important in
Yeah.
that equation. And so I don't want to pick on them though, because Christians are equally capable of doing this. Like the kind of Christian that you described, and the kind of Christian that I'm not sure if you saw that debate with Andrew Wilson and Matt Dillahunty.
Yeah.
when he was just ridiculing the guy's you know his partner. Like that's not helpful in this universe. Like it might make you feel better, you might laugh about it, you might feel like you've owned somebody, but you're generally hurting people in the process. So I mean, I
Yeah.
wouldn't want to contribute to that. That's not something I would want to be a part of, you know. So
Yeah, like ask yourself, are you more of a burden or a blessing? You know, is your spiritual practice burdening people or is it blessing people? And if people could think about that and decide what they want to be, then I think maybe it would increase people's numbers to do the right thing, because
mm,
most Buddhist Christians, everybody are on this journey to be a better person, I think, and to exhibit the qualities of Christ, so to speak, and to give to the poor, to give alms, to do good things to the world.
mhm.
But if all you're going to do is argue points and meditate all day and isolate yourself, or,
Or pray for
you know,
people.
pray for people, to toot your own horn, I mean, that's the kind of stuff Jesus talked about, isn't it? Didn't he talk about the hypocrites that do that kind of stuff? And
Not blowing your horn and
yeah, they
not
pray in public and to be seen by
wear the
men, and
nice robes.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're rewarded. You know, where their heart is, their reward is. I think he was
Yeah.
very onto something on that. That their reward is just to be seen by men and
Hmm.
to be honored by people instead of being honored by the heavenly Father. You know,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Well, Scott, it's 2 a.m. here, so I really thank you for your time, and I look forward to more talk. We've been meaning to hook up for the last 2 months, so
yeah,
it's been nice to catch up with you again.
yeah, man, no problem. We'll do it again soon, brother. You
Thank
have
you.
a
Have a nice
sweet,
day.
have great dreams, sir.
You too. Thank you, sir. Bye bye.
All right, buddy. Bye bye.
Bye bye.